Fuel is vital to the EMD. You obviously couldn't run the EMD without it. So in this program, we're going to look at the fuel system, how it works, the parts of the fuel system, and some of the things to look for while servicing those parts. Let's look at the parts of the fuel system. First, on the engine itself, there are the fuel injectors, the fuel pump, the duplex fuel filter, and the fuel supply and return lines. On the accessory rack, you've got the fuel suction strainer, the manual fuel priming pump, and all the piping that goes with it. And finally, on the outside of the engine and rack, there's the fuel tank itself. The way this whole system works is the fuel is drawn up from the fuel tank by the fuel pump into and through the suction strainer. From there, it goes through the duplex fuel filter into the supply line. After that, it's fed through a jumper line and into the injector inlet filter at each cylinder and into the injector. Some of the fuel is pumped into the cylinder at a very high pressure through a needle valve and spray tip in the injector. This is the supply of fuel for the combustion in the cylinder. The rest of the fuel flows through the injector, which lubricates and cools the working parts. This same fuel, after having gone through the injector, exits through a return filter, which prevents any dirt from coming back into the injector. Once through the filter, it goes back by way of a return line into the fuel tank. Let's back up a little bit and check out one of the most important links in the chain, the injector. It sits right here in the center of each cylinder head. This little spray tip sticks out slightly below the head, and this dowel right here holds it in the correct position. We told you earlier, the excess fuel in the injector helps to lubricate the inner working parts. The outer parts are lubricated by oil from the end of the injector rocker arm adjusting screw. Now, the plunger is connected to the plunger follower. The plunger follower is connected to the rocker arm. The rocker arm's connected to the injector cam, and that's what gives the plunger its consistent up and down motion. This up and down motion and the rotation of the plunger by means of the gear and rack allows the right amount of fuel to be let into the cylinder. By rotating the plunger, you can have no injection, idle, half load, full load, or anything in between. At each step, more fuel is pumped into the cylinder. Now, if you have any problems with the injector and you need to take it out and clean it, this is how you do it. Let's start by showing you how to take the injector out of the cylinder head. Before you even consider taking the injector out and working on it, you must have very clean conditions at the area where you're going to work on the injector. If any dirt or dust gets into the injector, it could foul up the parts, and that could cause some real problems. Take off the oil line between the rocker arm shaft and the camshaft bearing cap. Then you need to remove the fuel jumper line nut at the injector and the bolt at the fuel manifold and take out the fuel jumper line. Then go to the rocker arm shaft nut, loosen it, and take it off along with the washers and caps. Now you can take off the rocker arm shaft and rocker arms. The exhaust valve bridges can be removed now. Up here we have the crab nut, which you take off, and that will release the spherical washer and the crab. Now, take the injector out. If it's stuck, get an injector pry bar to help loosen it. Whenever the injector has been removed from the engine, you should always put protective caps on it so that no dirt or dust can get into the injector. Since the injector is such a vital part of the fuel system, it's important that it work correctly. To check to make sure that it does work, there's the injector test stand. It basically consists of the test stand pump lever, the pressure shutoff valve, the pressure gauge, the injector popping lever, the injector holder, and the fuel supply line. To make sure the test stand itself is working all right, you put a test stand block in place of the injector and pressure the stand up to 2,000 psi. After 5 minutes, the pressure should not have dropped below 1,975 psi. This test should be done with the pressure valve open all the way. If the pressure doesn't hold, shut the pressure shutoff valve and repeat the test. If the pressure holds when the shutoff valve is open, that's the position the valve should be in when testing the injectors. If the valve has to be shut to hold pressure, then leave the valve in that position when testing the injectors. When you're using the test stand, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind. Work the test stand pump lever at a rate of about 40 strokes per minute. This will let you work the check valve easily, and it'll circulate the fuel in the injector. Don't use a lot of force when using the popping lever, and don't let go of the lever. It could fly up and cause some damage to something or someone. When making the holding test, don't pressure up past 2,500 psi. And finally, don't reuse the fuel oil when you're testing. If you've noticed, the pressure gauge we're using has different pressure values than the ones we've talked about before. This particular gauge has a 10-to-1 ratio. In other words, when the gauge says 200 psi, it really says 2,000 psi. 150 on the gauge would really be 1,500 psi. To test the injector, put it in the test stand. Put the protective shield around the tip of the injector and fill the injector with fuel oil. Put the injector rack at the maximum fuel output and pop the injector with the popping lever, using about 40 strokes per minute. By doing this, you should get an atomized spray coming out of the tip. If you don't get this spray, pop the lever a couple of more times to try and dislodge any material or dirt in the injector. If you still don't get a good spray, you might have a stuck needle, dirt on the valve seat, or a bad valve seat. If you have dirt on the valve seat, all it may need is a good cleaning. We'll show you in a little while how to take the injector apart, clean it, and put it back together again. If it's a stuck needle, chances are the spray tip is clogged. All you do here is replace the tip. The same goes with the valve seat. Just replace it if it's bad. There are other tests that need to be done on the injector, so let's go through some of them. First is the holding pressure and leak test. Put the fuel line block on the injector and pump fuel into it until fuel comes out the filler cap. This is so you can get all of the air out of the injector. Tighten the fuel block and pressure up to about 2,000 psi. Check for leaks at the filter cap gasket, around the nut-to-body seal, and at the spray tip. For the pressure test, all you need to do is time how long it takes for the pressure to drop from 2,000 psi to 1,500 psi. If you have a new or reconditioned injector, the drop shouldn't be less than 30 seconds. And if it's a used injector, the drop shouldn't be less than 20 seconds. If the times are less than these times, the injector should be replaced. To make sure the rack is traveling freely, hold the injector horizontally and rotate it back and forth. The rack should travel under its own weight. If the rack sticks, it may be because of damaged gear teeth, scored plunger and bushing, or galling of the rack itself. To test the plunger to make sure it doesn't bind, put the injector in the test stand and pump out all the fuel. Then push down on the popping lever all the way. Hold the rack, and while letting up on the popping lever, slowly move the rack in and out a couple of times. The rack should move easily. If it doesn't, you could have scoring of the plunger and bushing, or a weak or broken spring. As we stated before, whenever the injector isn't in the engine, it should have protective caps on the fuel openings and the spray tip. This also holds true when storing the injector, and it should be stored in a rack like this, or wrapped up like this. If you have any problems with the injector and need to clean the internal parts or check them, here's what you need to do. To disassemble the injector, place it in a vise and use something soft like wood or copper to protect the body of the injector from damage by the vise. First, pop out the stop pin and remove the follower, plunger spring, and plunger as a unit. Loosen and remove the fuel connections and filter springs and take out the filters. Then, take the injector out of the vise and turn it upside down and put it back in the vise to loosen the injector nut. Now get a punch with a hole in it and separate the spray tip from the injector nut. And take off the injector nut. Now remove, in order, spray tip and needle valve, valve spring cage, valve spring seat and valve spring, check valve cage, check valve and spacer, spill deflector, bushing, gear retainer, gear and rack. There are a lot of pieces in the injector, but they all fit on top of each other, so it shouldn't be that difficult to take them apart. Each piece should then be cleaned in fuel oil and checked for any nicks or damage. To put it back together again, put the body in the vise, and place the fuel filters in. Then, the filter springs and gaskets. Dip the fuel connections in fuel oil and screw them down into place. Once again, turn the body around in the vise and place the plunger spring on. And dip the plunger in fuel oil and place it and the follower back on as a unit. Punch in the stop pin and press down on the follower to seat the plunger in the correct position. Turn the body upside down in the vise and put the rack in. Dip the gear in fuel oil and drop it into place. There's one thing you need to keep an eye on here, and that's these dots on both the gear and the rack. The gear has one dot and the rack has two, and they should be lined up together like this. This will let the rack travel its full length. From here, everything that's to be put on should be dipped in fuel oil and stacked. Here's how the pieces go on. First, gear retainer. Bushing. Spill deflector. Spacer and check valve. Check valve cage. Injector valve spring and injector valve spring seat. Valve spring cage and needle valve and spray tip should be put on as a unit. Once they're all in place, slip the injector nut over everything and tighten it down. Now it's ready to go back in. But before installing the injector, make sure it's the right one for the engine model you're going to put it in, and clean out any dirt that might have gotten into the injector port. Put the injector into the tapered hole in the cylinder head. This dowel, right here on the injector, lines up with the hole on the cylinder head to make sure the injector goes in right. When the injector is seated in the hole, there should be a perfect seal between the injector and the cylinder head. This is so none of the compression from the piston can leak past the injector to cylinder head seal. The other thing that needs to fit into its place is this knob on the end of the injector rack. It goes into this slot at the bottom of the injector control lever assembly. Next, put the crab spherical washer and nut on. Watch the fit between the crab and the spherical washer. See how they're both tapered? Be careful to put them together correctly. Once these are together, torque the nut to 50 foot-pounds. Put in the exhaust valve bridges, and then the rocker arm shaft and the rocker arms. Loosen the injector rocker arm lock nut and back off on the adjusting screw several turns. Now, the rocker arm shaft caps, washers, and nuts need to go on. Some Texaco thread tech should be put on the washers, studs, and nut threads before tightening the nuts. Once they've been tightened, each nut should be torqued down to 300 foot-pounds. Reinstall the rocker arm oil line, checking to see that the connecting surfaces are clean and that new gaskets are used. Also, be careful with which set of bolts you put where. The bolts at the bearing cap have a coarse thread and are longer than the fine-threaded bolts of the rocker arm shaft. Next, put in the fuel jumper line and torque down the nut and the bolt to 40 foot-pounds. Now the injector is ready to be timed. Because timing is so important on the engine, there's another program that deals with the timing of your EMD. So when you're ready to time the injector, take a look at Timing Your EMD Injector, Rack, and Exhaust Valves. There are a couple of other things within the fuel system that are covered in other programs. They are the duplex fuel filters and the suction strainers. Both of these are covered in 1400-hour maintenance. The information given in the program covers installation, removal, and maintenance of these two things. If you need to know about either of these two, just go back to the program called 1400-hour maintenance. That leaves us with the fuel pump and the hand priming pump. Let's start with the fuel pump. The fuel pump is mounted onto and is driven by the lube oil scavenging pump. Fuel is brought in through the inlet and fills up the space left by the gear teeth separating, as shown here. And then it's forced around the pump and through the outlet. The seal is there to prevent any leakage between the pump body and the rotating drive shaft. If you're having any problems and need to take it apart, here's what you do. Put the pump in a vise, but don't over-tighten it or you might damage the housing. Take off the faceplate, then turn the pump over in the vise and take off the packing nut and seal nut. By tapping on the rotor, this should loosen the seal to where it can be removed. After that, take out the gland assembly. Then take out the spring and the washers. Now that the pump is completely apart, you need to inspect it. To do this, look at all the components and check for any wear or damage to them. Check the surfaces for any scratches or grooves. Look at the surfaces of the idler and crescent and the inner surface of the pump body. Also, the shaft should be able to turn freely in the pump body, and the clearance between the shaft and the pump body shouldn't be more than 2/1000ths of an inch, and the rotor end clearance shouldn't be less than 1/1000th of an inch. To put the pump back together again, you first put the pump body back in the vise and then put in the gland assembly. Slide on the washers, the spring, and the seal. Then the seal nut is put on, and the packing nut goes on it to hold everything in place. Once again, rotate the pump in the vise, and with the idler in place, replace the cover onto the pump body. The fuel pump should be tested after it's been replaced on the engine. To do this, run the pump at 1200 RPM for about 15 minutes. This will help seat the seal. Then, check the pump output by taking off the fuel line on the pressure side of the pump and drain it into a graduated container. To time the output, it should be measured by the minute. For an 8-cylinder engine, the output should be 2.1 gallons per minute at 900 RPM. For 12, 16, and 20-cylinder engines, it should be 4.5 gallons per minute at 900 RPM. The last thing we need to talk about is the fuel priming pump. All this does is manually prime the engine when it's been off for any length of time. To do this, just pump the lever. That's it. There's really not much to the priming pump, but if you do have problems with it, to get to the inside parts, just take off the handle, take off the cover plate, and all the packing. And each of the 3 parts on the inside can be taken out. To put it back together, put the parts back in the inside, put the packing in, and then put the handle back on. As you can see, the fuel system isn't very complicated except when it comes to the injectors. So whenever working on these, be extremely careful.